I'm delighted today to welcome our guest, Jim Joyce, co-founder and CEO of digital therapeutics company Health Beacon. This is an Irish company that is proving a game changer for people requiring injectable medication and is fast becoming a disruptive leader in health tech. Today we are going to hear about the founding of this growing company, which offers a platform, a smart bin and a digital app to help patients adhere to their medication schedule. Jim himself has had a long and distinguished career across the worlds of life sciences, health tech and financial services. From being an entrepreneur to a stint as a stockbroker to running global teams for multinational Shearing Plough, Jim is now leading his second health tech company, which he founded and built here in Ireland. With his wealth of experience, Jim will share his insights, lessons learned and experiences around building and scaling a digital disruptor in the world of healthcare. Jim, you are very welcome.
Delighted to be here. Look forward to the conversation, Aimee.
So Jim, it's not that often that we hear or see maybe of Americans founding and building companies here in Ireland. Perhaps you might share an overview of that background and how you've come to found not just one, but two startups here.
No, my history in relationship with Ireland probably goes back to, if you grow up, I grew up in Boston. And in Boston, you had to claim to be Irish in some sense in order to get through school and be part of the community. So I grew up in a very big classically Irish-American community, so had lots of affinity towards Ireland. Had no idea my career would go towards Ireland. But at one point, after I was kind of in a career transition, I did an MBA at the University College of Dublin. Okay. So I came to Ireland, I actually met my wife, and then we ended up going back to the States, and then I ended up getting a pretty significant job back here years later in Ireland. So that was kind of a little bit, the story's much longer than that, but that's the story.
So you've settled, yep. And now you've said, okay, I'm going out on my own, I've left the multinational world. You founded one startup, very successful, sold on. Now you're on to your second, Health Beacon.
Yep.
Really exciting product, real disruptor in the health tech space. Maybe you'll tell us a bit about the company and the product and exactly what it is and what it's doing.
Sure. So Health Beacon, our mission as a company is to build smart tools for managing medications. So we're focused on this area we call high consequence medications, where it makes a lot of sense to put technology, into a patient's lives to help increase the likelihood that they'll be successful on whatever medication that they're taking. We're specifically focusing on an area of injectable medication where people can be taught to administer the medications in the home setting that in the past they might have had to go to a hospital environment to get, similarly efficacious medications. Now they can be taught to administer the medications themselves in the home setting to keep really, chronic and critical diseases at bay, diabetes, severe rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, asthma, cardiovascular conditions. So a range of conditions are managed this way, but those patients need support. And that's where Health Beacon comes in, is, we put a device into the home setting that increases the likelihood that they'll be successful on those medication by, monitoring and interacting and supporting those patients.
And how does that work then? What does the device look like and how does it interact with patients?
So the device is kind of an elegant looking, almost discrete tool that kind of, could sit on your kitchen counter or could sit in your bedroom. And what we're doing effectively is any patient that goes on one of these injectable medications needs something called a sharps bin. So it's a safe place to dispose of your used syringe or auto injector. We've turned that practical requirement to have a sharps bin into a monitoring tool. So we've encased your traditional sharps bin, this kind of elegant layer, and that sharps bin now is aware of when you should take the medication. So it alerts and lights up when it's time to take your medication. And then the act of disposing of the used injection or needle into our device, we use image recognition to say
recognition. So it's not sensors, it's using image recognition.
Well, both, yeah. So you drop your used auto injector into it, trips a sensor. Then we use an image we take a photo, and then we compare that versus our own kind of object and image recognition, and we confirm, okay, the right medication was taken at the right time by that act of disposal. So the whole theory on it is that, the patient isn't asked to do anything that they wouldn't have to do anyway. They needed to dispose of it. They just need now to dispose of their used injection to our system, and that gives us this incredibly important piece of data or evidence that they actually took the medication. And then we can kind of stream that data into our own care support team or back to their clinician and just stay with them and make sure, so it kind of then supports a wider kind of care management system from there.
And that's the kind of monitoring piece. Then does the patient itself, I believe there's an app that goes with it that sits on their mobile phone. So how does that work for them, or what kind of triggers are in that?
Sure. Yeah, so our technology stack is we have this device, the Smart Sharp Spin, that goes in the home. So, the world's first FDA cleared Smart Sharp Spin that in and of itself would increase adherence to therapy. We have a companion app that goes into the hands of the patient where all of their data, all of their injection site, they need to rotate injection sites when they're taking these medications. They can get agency over their care by, putting their own notes and feedback in there. So it's a really powerful piece of software. And then we actually have a system for helping people get rid of the injectable waste at the end of it, so they can just box up their injectable waste and they can mail that back to a Health Beacon facility. And then we have all of our clinical tools behind the scenes. So our tech stack has kind of 4 different key components to it.
Did you seek out this niche, or how did you kind of see the need for this product and solution?
Right. Yeah. So as I said before, it was like it's a classic kind of 12, 13 year overnight success in my mind. So as a pharmaceutical executive, I would have been involved in launching these types of brands. I worked for Schering-Plough Pharmaceuticals for a lot of years. We would have had a lot of medications like this, and we always saw that patients struggled to adhere to medication. Right. They struggle with the practical support. So a lot of pharmaceutical companies would try to provide that support to increase their likelihood. So I was involved in that. And then from there, I went and launched a company called Point of Care Health Services, and that was a services company that tried to tackle these issues of people not adhering. And so we put nurses into homes and call centers and different support. And then really the idea for the Health Beacon for me was just a kind of an end. Ultimately I said, we saw, each of these patients need these sharp spins. What if the sharp spin can talk? And we were, trying to just, get at this issue of how do we more accurately help patients adhere to their medication, but we need the data to see which patients were struggling so we knew which ones to interact with. So it was just kind of in a moment of brainstorming it, with my team that we came up with, what if these sharp spins could give us this vital piece of data? I became obsessed with it. That idea, started, filing IP and started looking for supporters in terms of investors to kind of go with me on the journey. Started right away looking for customers in terms of, if I built this technology, would you consider deploying it? And I got lots of enthusiasm along the way. So I think as an entrepreneur, as soon as you get, that kind of enthusiastic supporters, then, it's a spiral. You just get more enthusiastic about it. And, kind of 8 years.
You probably hit that moment of you're like, I'm onto something here that's quite disruptive. It's going to make a difference in this health tech space, and that's spurring you on, totally. I imagine, even further.
Yeah, totally. And I can put it through the lens, having launched a company before, which was, primarily a services company, medical services company. Now I had something, this is globally applicable. It's a scalable piece of technology. I could scale it right here from Ireland. I wouldn't necessarily have to, have thousands of people around the world. I could work with it. Yeah. I had really good relationships with the pharmaceutical industry, and I knew there was an appetite or interest from them to consider scaling it. So I could try to work with the pharma companies to try to, get it into other markets and in the journey. So I just kind of saw the kind of pieces, not just that the technology was clever and could be imminently useful to the patients, but there was also seemed to be a pathway for distributing the technology, through big pharma at the time as our first clients.
And obviously you spoke there about kind of being this 13-year-old startup success overnight, and you've got the smart bin, you've got a platform, you've a digital app.
Right.
How the world has changed a lot in technology, I suppose, in the last 10, 15 years.
Sure.
Has that kind of those technical advancements made an impact on how you've been able to deliver or build a product?
Yeah, 100%. Like when I think about, even I was delighted when I had this company. I was saying, I wish, my first company. We applied technology to the challenge of managing, nurses and, clinical services. But now I had something where the technology was, the technology was at a kind of moment in time where, you had the benefit of cloud, computing. You had the benefit of people really thinking about IoT devices in the home. You had some really interesting, you had an appetite within the funding environment to kind of fund companies like ours. So there's a lot of things that wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago if I was launching this company, previously. I mean, the infrastructure just wasn't there, but I remember early on, we were going into, like I say, our device connects through mobile cellular connectivity. So we were going to Vodafone and we're saying, hey, this is what we're thinking we're doing. And they were incredibly collaborative about us thinking about, okay, you want to put these devices in homes and how would that connectivity work? So I think the environment needs to be right for it, meaning like the world has to be ready for the technology.
Yeah. And there's so much more to come. And I think another aspect I've seen you mention, and when we spoke before, you said, when you talk about this market, that I think you said there's 30 million people across the EU and US who take injectable medication. Driving that adoption, I suppose what I'm getting towards is you've released some peer review research as well in this space. How important has that been? Or how has that helped you kind of maybe scale or get into more markets and customers?
Yeah, no, I think it's, if you're in health technology or just healthcare or biotech, there's a seriousness and a robustness to any solution you put onto the market that, people have to be able to look at your solution, say, versus other options. So I think having peer-reviewed, research that's challengeable, that's well-structured, that really understands the effect that you have is vital to any healthcare system thinking about adopting your technology. So essential. So our peer-reviewed research is that if patients go on the Health Beacon system, they're 19% more likely to still be taking their medication 12 months after initiating. And so what we've done in that case is we've helped, these patients might have either failed on the medication or been inappropriately switched to another one just because they didn't take it. So we've been able to kind of help those people in a way. So we can demonstrate that inspires confidence in, clinicians, pharma companies, insurance companies to think about adopting it.
But 19% is a huge...
Yeah.
That's a huge impact you're having actually on people's lives.
Yeah.
That a product can make that difference and impact on it.
Well, I think that's the big thing about, just going back, like with medical adherence. So this challenge of medical adherence, for those 30 million people that you just mentioned, 1 in 2 patients will fail on their medications within the first 12 months of initiating. And the preponderance of reason for failure is non-clinical. It's not because the drug didn't work, it's because they didn't have the right support. And that's where we see companies like Health Beacon. So in terms of injectables, we want to play that role in the home setting. So the people that, for non-clinical reasons, they didn't believe in the drug, there was about a side effects, that could have been managed, they forgot to take it, maybe as they get older, they're taking lots of different medications and they're getting confused, or so there's a whole range of reasons. So we want to, put these tools in place to see, when people are being challenged, and then can we help them? Can we provide really practical support? So, it's an important role that goes beyond, like we have these incredibly efficacious medications now, but they're not going to do any good unless people take them, kind of as prescribed by the doctor.
And it's fantastic that the technology has moved on to enable that. I want to delve a little bit more into the company operations and scaling, looking at whether customers, markets, ecosystem, and I suppose the customer model piece, what does that look like? So who are you selling to?
Right.
And I think this could be interesting for some of the listeners because, often you're building and designing a product, but you're not selling it to the end user.
Right.
So it'd be interesting to understand that customer model you have.
Sure. I think if, probably maybe what's a little bit different about, health technology, digital health technology, is, the business model is probably a little bit more complicated than if you were in consumer-facing, technology. And I'm not trying to say that I'm sure there's lots of complexities in those areas as well. But in this case, the person who gets the benefit of the technology isn't the one that's making the decision about whether it's prescribed in many cases, and isn't the one paying for it, or isn't the ultimate, there might be an insurance company or a government in the middle. So you have these kind of, these 3 different stakeholders and probably a few others as well. So you have to, in my opinion, or I always describe it as I'm too old of an entrepreneur to not have a really clear business model right from the beginning. So when I had this technology and I had the concept of it, I took it into the pharmaceutical companies right away, because the pharma companies provide what's called patient support programs. So they effectively, if you're on one of their medications, they'll pay for the device, and then Health Beacon ships the device directly to the patient. So we have a case where they're bearing the costs of the of the Health Beacon device going into the home, and then we're developing a direct relationship with the patient and supplying the device and that support. So we call that our patient services model. And what we're doing effectively is we're kind of going to how are these people supported today, and can we make a case into those systems to have them adopt Health Beacon to increase adherence to therapy and ultimately avoid kind of downstream healthcare. Excess healthcare costs, And
I suppose the benefit to the pharmaceutical companies, so you're going to them first, but is that you're getting the data, you can feed that back in to them, and presumably
right.
it's on an anonymized basis.
Right.
Or are they getting it direct about individual patients?
Yeah, no, it would always be anonymized. So the pharmaceutical companies' benefits are quite clear. They want their products to be effective. So if people take 60% of dose or 70% of dose, then even the perceived efficacy of the product, could, and then ultimately that might to people coming off their medication altogether. So the benefit to the pharmaceutical company is quite clear. Their products were studied under a clinical trial setting, where it was probably these patients were robustly managed. Now when they're in the real world, they're facing real problems, and they want to make sure that the patients get the benefit of the medications that they spent, years and years, kind of developing and bringing to the market. So they get that benefit. And then from a kind of an anonymized perspective, they can, for research purposes, they can learn more about their drugs. Like, for example, what time do people take these medications, during the course of the day? When are they likely to miss them? So these are all, I think as the health systems move on, more real-world data is going to be asked of pharmaceutical companies. So It's like you did your clinical trials, but now we put your medicines in the real world, and what kind of real-world efficacy you're seeing, real-world data. So they're incredibly interested for research purposes, for real-time consumption of their medication.
And your technology can help with their validation around a lot of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, that's a really interesting model, and I like what you were saying around that. Going into business, you have that model
right.
in mind first. Did you have a similar type of model when you thought about then the markets? Because I believe you've launched in 15 global markets.
Yep.
Close
to 17, yeah.
Oh, close to 17, okay, yeah. Apologies. US main market?
Yeah, so US has taken us, a while to, kind of get our hands around. The US healthcare system is so fundamentally different than the European or the Irish healthcare system or some of these other markets, like we operate in Netherlands and Belgium and Portugal and amongst others. So first of all, our product required FDA clearance, so we had a regulatory barrier that we successfully achieved kind of, clearance for our product so we could sell it. It's considered a Class 2 medical device in the US. So that was a hurdle we needed to invest in. And then, the way the US healthcare system works is there's this group called specialty pharmacy organizations that tend to play the role that maybe the pharmaceutical companies might have played in Europe. So we had to kind of, learn about these organizations and expose the technology to them and, run pilots with them. And that's gone well. We were able to kind of repeat the effect that we had in Europe, in the US. That's leading to some major deployments of our contracts. And I think the other area in the US, which is maybe a little bit unique to the US, is that there's the consumers are willing to pay directly for health technology. So there is an expectation from a US consumer that's saying, hey, listen, if I want a device like the Health Beacon to help me manage my condition, my diabetes, or for a loved one, to manage it, then I'll pay the money for it. So the system's a little bit different that we just had to learn and figure out. And
did you have to put people on the ground in the US to do that? So kind of that approach to getting into the US market, because obviously the company is based here. Was that important, or was it a lot of flight time over and back? Well, a lot of flight time. I set up the office right next to, I was thinking, kind of follow the Aer Lingus route, the Dublin to Boston, and then we're actually setting up an office in Orlando right now, which also, should have another, once we're all flying again, should have a direct flight, so we could just practically get there. And I always had this idea that the team could be fluid between different locations. But so we actually took we have a beautiful office out, in Dublin at the top of Nace Road. We call it the Digital Mile. And so we have a beautiful office there. We actually replicated the same office in Boston. So it had the same look and the feel and design. But you need to have, if you're going to go into big markets like the US, UK,
Germany, France, you need to have people on the ground that understand those markets, that live and breathe those aspects of it. You can't do it, in my opinion, remotely or virtually, or certainly I haven't figured out a way to do it. So you need really smart people on the ground, talking to customers, giving confidence.
So kind of once that decision is made to go into that market, that's when you start looking at getting those resources.
100%. Yeah, you have to invest ahead of the curve a little bit too. Like we had to set that office up before we even had, a real, to make sure, that we practically had the way to support clients, because they want to see it. Like a big healthcare system wants to see that you have some kind of U.S. infrastructure.
Were networks important in that at all? And as far as, Ireland is a leading location for, medical device companies, for pharmaceutical companies.
Yep.
Were you able to tap into that kind of multinational network of those companies here, or other networks within Ireland that were supportive of what you were trying to do?
Yeah, totally. I mean, we totally worked the famous kind of Irish, global network system that I think a lot of people talk about. I think people are quite amazed, as someone who grew up in the U.S., and amazed by the connective tissue that Ireland has around the world, and even like your own, the IDA Ireland, or the Enterprise Ireland, the role that they play. They're totally up for it. I mean, we actually even had a funny story where, Enda Kenny on his final trade mission to Chicago, happened to be, in town near one of our big customers, and we were able to bring our customers into kind of an audience with that. So there's the power of the Irish network. Obviously there's a great corridor of connectivity between Boston and Dublin. Yeah. We completely try to leverage that. We also find that because the pharmaceutical presence in Ireland is quite substantial, that there's a lot of successful Irish executives that might have started out in Ireland, and made their way up through the ranks. So a lot of our customers, for example, during the course of implementation, might be promoted. So they might end up in a different European office, or Swiss office, or U.S. office. So we try to play the long game and saying, hey, we're going to be around for a long time.
Moving on from that, and it's slightly tied into that in terms of understanding the company, is company culture.
Sure.
And a lot of the technology companies, digital tech, you see these companies going up, and a huge importance on their employees, on culture. How do you approach kind of building company culture within HealthBeacon?
Yeah, so we take it very seriously, and I think it starts obviously with the founding team, like, hey, what are we trying to do here? What's our commonality among our small group, right? Like, how do we think about that? And then as we bring people on, how are they going to fit and kind of augment that? So we spend a lot of time thinking about it. You're not to think you're in control of your culture, so every new person you bring in, evolves the culture, hopefully in a lovely way. But you have to be really cognizant of that and say, so we spend tons of time thinking about that. The HealthBeacon culture, as I think about it, is we want the environment to be fast-paced. We want it to have, be full of empathy for each other, for our customers, and what's happening. We want to work with really intelligent people, and it's not so much just like standardized testing intelligent, but like lifelong learners, right? They're walking into we have people in our organization that might have started in one role, as a project manager, and ended up in data sciences, and so we want to be open to that. Where their interests go. And then probably a fourth one, if anyone hopefully that feels, is like, we also want it to be enjoyable, fun, God forbid, it's actually fun, that you enjoy working with your colleagues. You don't take yourself too seriously, about that. So that's kind of, if I were to kind of run through, I'm sure there's other attributes on it that, that we see that, and probably, and that leads ultimately to collaboration, because our technology our products are quite unique, that it takes a team to implement our system. So you need to have, technologists, like software developers and hardware developers, and maybe regulatory and medical and data sciences. So it's fundamentally collaborative. It's not I went out and kind of, hunted and, found the big, trophy.
Multidisciplinary teams working on it. And it's important that you, I suppose, stay cognizant of what that culture and those kind of founding values are, particularly as you look at scaling, and you've scaled internationally already, but kind of going now to plans to 150 people. I mean, that the culture will evolve, but staying true to your values, I suspect, will be important.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, actually, you brought it up when we were talking earlier. This internationalization of the company. So right from the beginning, actually having founded my other company, that largely had our customer base here in Ireland. In this case, this is a global company. So when we think about, kind of, we'll say diversity of opinion, diversity of experience, kind of openness to international, possibly travel, perspectives, is critical to us. So we didn't want one core, that it's only these types of people that kind of do well inside HealthBeacon. And, that's been quite critical. So even when we look at whether we're hiring an Irish executive that might have grown up in Dublin, or we're hiring, someone that might have just, like myself, that might have, relocated their lives, to Ireland, or we're building out new offices, we're looking for people that really value, that kind of global international experience, and they can see that they enjoy it, versus maybe, just, focus more locally on what's happening domestically.
That kind of leads into, again, throughout these kind of series of talks, we talk a lot about diversity.
Yep. And
HealthBeacon, I'm right in understanding, has quite a diverse board, so it's important that it kind of, I suppose, stems from the top down, particularly from a gender perspective. Has that been something that's been important to you in building diversity into the team? So you spoke there about the international mindset, kind of, but from a gender perspective, how is that reflected in HealthBeacon? Yeah,
no, I think it's, I think it's a phenomenal time. I mean, people can think, about the different requirements that put on our executives, whether it's, people like ourselves as leaders, in the community, what's our role? I think it's actually a great time to work in some ways, because there's a real openness to gender diversity, right? There's a real openness to it, meaning, and I think some people are always, incredibly open to it. I think we've all worked with phenomenal people on, all, however they identify themselves, or all genders, throughout our lives. So for HealthBeacon, that's critical. We want to see, people all the way through the organization. We want to be cognizant of it. We also want it to be, we want to have the signaling and the truth behind the signaling. So at our board level, when we think about non-executive directors, we want that to be well represented. We want that to be on an ongoing basis. When we think about project teams, all the way through the organization. What I've only seen upside to date from it, I grew up personally. I grew up when I had a much younger brother, but I had 4 sisters that I was never convinced. In our home, it was a case of, incredibly smart, capable, women that went on to, phenomenal careers. My own mother went back to law school as I went to, undergraduate. So when I went to go to university, she went back to law school. I saw that. So I had great mentors in that regard. There wasn't this sense of, that it should be any way other than that. But I think we live in a really interesting time. Whereas if you want to go forward and put a candidate forward with really diverse opinions, diverse sets, everyone's, I think, generally, I'm not to be optimistic but I think a lot of people are really open to it. And then we have to hold ourselves to account that if we organize in a way where people feel that we've excluded them somehow, we have to really try to engineer against that.
I mean, it's great that the openness is there. I do think it's still a long way to go on the gender diversity front, but I think having the conversations and being open to it just needs to keep moving forward. I mean, it's a really exciting journey HealthBeacon has been on. It's an innovative sector. So what's next? What does the next 3 to 5 years look like?
Yes, so HealthBeacon has, we have the leading technology and support, system for injectable medication. So for helping people, there's 30 million people, across U.S. and Europe, and ultimately even beyond that, get the most out of their medications and really manage their healthcare. So we have a big mission, to do right now. So we have to scale the organization, like we were talking about before. We're tripling the size of the organization. We're looking for 100,000 devices to be in patients' homes over the next couple of years. And we want to keep investing in our technology stack. So kind of what I described before, that's, it's heads down, really establish long-term leadership in that space, build the organization in a meaningful way, and then accelerate that development. So we want to now start to innovate into adjacencies, into those other areas. So as medical adherence company. You know, we see ourselves adding kind of adjacent kind of hardware tools alongside that. Yeah. We're already actively working on those projects with our existing partners. So we'd see over the, I can't talk about it now, but over the next 12 months, we would introduce kind of, major kind of, we'll say technical innovation gains, to our technology stack. That's going to allow us to really kind of anchor that. And ultimately the goal here is that, is to help people in the home, deal with these chronic and critical conditions and really kind of reclaim as much of their life back as they can.
Yeah, and it's fantastic. And I mean, for a story from an Irish technology company, it's wonderful. We're going to just wrap up today as kind of part of this series with a couple of quick fire questions for you, maybe take it away from you, Health Beacon, and just focus on Jim.
Sure.
So which, whether disruptive or not, tech company do you admire most?
Yeah, I mean, the one that jumps to mind from a technology for me is Amazon is fascinating to me, and I'm sure a lot of people point to them because they're obvious success. But I just think it is absolutely fascinating how, as an entrepreneurial organization, they were able to so many times, they built an organization that for years was just, pursuing their goals. When people looked at their growth goals and their profit goals, there was a lot of cynicism. They didn't doubt themselves for a moment. And then, they moved into areas like AWS, their online cloud computing platforms. They're innovating in that space. So they just feel like this is an organization that just never gave up on what its mission was, innovated when they need to do. And then we're all now, got through the pandemic based on Amazon shipments coming into our homes. So the role they play in our lives is amazing,
Very good. Then what is the best leadership advice you have ever been given?
Yeah, I think one of the, so probably a unique aspect of leadership advice, that I have been given is, to back yourself. And in the same breath is also to be forgiving, to be forgiving to yourself. So I think anyone that goes on an entrepreneurial journey of setting up their own company ultimately, has to have resilience and persistence, all the things you hear about. They have to have a unique point of view about what they want to bring into the market. They have to probably be a little bit obsessive about that mission. So they have to have those things, which probably isn't unique to any of the other disruptors that you've talked to during your series. But I think sometimes, just being, backing yourself, believing yourself, and then when it doesn't work out, actually, just taking a step back and being forgiven, whether it's forgiving to your team or forgiving to yourself, about what you're doing, because it's, it can be lonely at different moments here, and you gotta, you just gotta, get the energy and get up the next morning and tackle it if something tries to take you off your stride,
And it seems like you do that every day. What then advice would you give to an emerging or tech kind of scaling company?
Yeah, if we kind of zero that in to say the digital health tech sector, so I think with we live in the environment that we're in now versus say when I started even this company, 8 years ago with Health Beacon 8 years ago, is when you're walking in, with a solution, with your point of view. I would say the first thing you want to figure out really, really quickly is, how your business model, your customers are going to react to your technology. So you want to move as quickly as you can to the tougher questions that sometimes people avoid. Will you buy my product? Will you adopt it? What's the cost of building that? And zero it in. I think in my first company, when I was looking at some ways, I was kind of almost like in some ways building the technology, the service in my mind or something behind the scenes, and then waiting till it was perfect to take it into the customers. In this one, as soon as I had something, I tried to kind of crystallize that vision as tightly as I could, and then immediately get into that customer. And because you're going to have to do it anyway, you might as well jump right in and get
But it comes back to that backing yourself to go do it and go and ask those hard questions early on and be prepared to take what's said on board and use it wisely.
Yeah, and understand the stage you're at. Walk tall into the room. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm building. I think people back explicitness. So you want to walk in with a very clear, explicit idea, and then get reaction to it, and then think about how you need to evolve it.
Yeah, I think that's really sound advice a lot of people can take away. What tech leaders do you admire most?
Yeah, I mean, the one that is kind of inspiring to me right now, there's a fellow by the name of Glenn Tullman who launched a very exciting company called Livongo was recently acquired, and that was a diabetes health tech company, kind of chronic disease management that ultimately went from, a concept to major sales, to really nail the business model within the U.S. and ultimately listed on the NASDAQ, to great fanfare and great success. His original story was he was helping his own son deal with his diabetes. He was a very successful entrepreneur, became incredibly obsessed about improving the experience for people that are dealing with diabetes in the home setting. Used all of his resources and muster to kind of build this a really effective organization. So that's just been inspiring to watch him.
That's fantastic. It's really it's such an impactful space, the digital tech, and what you can do and create. So my last question, as we've kind of referenced already, you've built this company in Ireland. Kind of from your opinion, kind of what makes Ireland this great location for digital technology companies to thrive and scale?
Yeah, so I think like Ireland, like any environment, has some unique attributes to it. That you talk about, I'm sure, Aimee, all the time. So I think you want to be really clear what are the attributes that Ireland has that can, help your initiative, right? So in my mind, there is a culture of experimentation. There's a culture of, kind of backing earlier stage companies. There is a big presence of, U.S. multinationals and other, European multinationals here, be it from technology companies like Google to, the Pfizers and, Schering-Plough or Mercks of the world that have headquarters here. So you want to leverage all those parts of the ecosystem as much as you can. You also, the challenge, what you want to do is that first phase of the company, that kind of experimentation around getting reaction to your product. It's a quite cozy market, so you can talk to, people in government, clinicians. They're kind of your neighbors. They're around. You know them. You can network into them really effectively, and then you want to think about, how you can use that same network to export it, as we talked earlier about, into the rest of the organization. I think there's also some specific, entrepreneurial organizations are a focus, of the, of the kind of healthcare system, the apparatus, like we talked about before. Mm-hmm. You want to take advantage of the specifics, attributes of the system. So, Enterprise Ireland largely, in most cases, are willing to back successful ventures. Yeah. When you think about, other kind of financing opportunities in the market, they do exist here. So I think you kind of know your playing field really well and leverage all the assets that are available. So I think it's a good place to initiate. It's a good place to do it there. And also, almost because of its size, you have to internationalize quickly. So you don't have a choice. If you want really big scale, you got to look elsewhere. So you kind of always have to have this kind of outward-looking attitude, I think. Yeah.
But ultimately, the ecosystem is here. It supports companies that do want to grow and scale forward.
That's been my experience, yeah.
Which is fantastic. Well, Jim, thank you so much on behalf of the RDS and IDA. This has been fantastic conversation. We mentioned earlier energy. You definitely have lots of energy, but I think it's just also really impressive to see the scale that your company is developing into and the impact it's actually, meaningful impact it's going to have on people's lives going forward. So thank you for joining us today. I think for me, a lot of the key takeaways are probably, one, that tech is truly transforming the world of healthcare. Two, innovation and adoption are increasingly happening at a faster pace than ever before. And three, HealthBeacon is going to be a strong leader in the growing digital disruption of the sector. So I wish Jim and his team every continued success. And thank you all for watching, and do check out our other digital disruptor conversations on the RDS YouTube channel. And as always, feel free to like and share this video to help expand the reach of today's conversation. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.